share those sentiments as I welcome you on this program. Traditionally, we have had for every budget delivery of a national budget, or even with the mid-year reviews, we have had programs whereby we ask experts who can join us, some of my colleagues in the parliament and other persons who will join us in the discussion on what is the state of the economy in Trinidad and Tobago. What really is the state of play in our society? What are citizens going to expect? Are they getting value for money? Is it that they have more dollar worth in their pocket whenever they go to the gas pumps? How are they managing in the groceries? What is the position with inflation? So all of these matters we have tried in the past to keep you abreast, and on this occasion it is no different. I am, of course, humbled to be able to join a panel of distinguished gentlemen this afternoon, where we are going to get into this debate, just having recently engaged in the supplementation of appropriation for the fiscal year 2023. So the government and the Minister of Finance, Minister Colm Imbert, having delivered the national fiscal policy, the budget for the 2023 fiscal year. That would have been delivered last year in 2022, September to October. Now we are dealing with what is called the mid-year review, and we will get into some more of the details. That mid-year review would have started essentially last week, Wednesday, and it would have entailed what we call the Standing Finance Committee. And so the monies which they are seeking to supplement the national budget, if you want to say add monies to what was allocated for, you are correct in doing so. There were certain headings and items that were identified by the government in the Standing Finance Committee last week. These items were put before the Parliament, and so all members of Parliament, those on the government side, would have had to basically make a case as to why they're seeking a supplementation or additional funding. And those on the opposition side, would have asked questions as to whether this should not have been catered for before, whether these sums should not be utilized in a better manner. What guarantees, what safeguards do we have, as always, that the monies are going to be used for the intended purpose? Are we spending monies properly? So all of these matters would have started last week, and of course led by the distinguished Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessar, leader of the opposition, political leader of the United National Congress, getting our marching orders. This work commenced since last week, Wednesday, prior to Wednesday, but in the Parliament since Wednesday. And going to Friday, and then of course this week, yesterday, we would have had the debate on the supplementation of appropriation for fiscal year 2023. So I leave that there for now as just a prelude as to why we are discussing it at this point in time. And I would like to take the opportunity to, of course, welcome the distinguished gentlemen alongside me on the panel this evening. So I would first like to welcome, of course, on this program. He's no stranger to the studios of Radio and TV Jagriti. He has, of course, I should say, assisted me and accompanied me on previous programs. I believe we would have done one on the public procurement bill and some other related matters as well. I speak of none other than the opposition chief whip, member of parliament for Pointe-a-Pierre, the esteemed, the distinguished Dr. David Lee. Very senior parliamentarian, someone who I get a lot of advice from in terms of parliamentary matters, yes, but also in the politics and also in terms of service to the people. So I want to welcome Dr. David Lee.
Thank you. Thank you.
I want to let him know at the outset that he is the chief whip, so he's essentially the boss in the parliament. But I am essentially the chief whip of these proceedings this evening, so I will be the boss. So
that's fine. That's fine.
That's fine. Dr. David Lee, welcome to the program, and I am very appreciative that I know you have a hectic schedule, and deeply appreciative that you could join on this program where we can discuss some of these matters.
Thank you, Dinesh, for inviting me here tonight. It's always a pleasure being in your company and the other members here tonight. Just before you go on, I always feel nostalgic when I come into this studio. Because back in 2015, when I got into politics, one of my first interviews was with the late Sat, and he had his Mukhtar program. So I will always remember his generosity and his big heart inviting me on his program. So it's always a pleasure being in this studio. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. David Lee. And of course, next to me, my immediate right-hand side, we have the Member of Parliament for Mayaro, MP Rushton Parray. MP Rushton Parray, of course, has an engineering background, an IT background. He's a distinguished businessman in Mayaro and also throughout Trinidad and Tobago. MP Parray is someone who I would urge people to visit. His constituency, you know, it is still one of the top local vacation destinations to go down to Mayaro. I tend to go there very often. Not necessarily Dr. David Lee to make trouble with MP Parray, but I go because I want to take a vacation in Mayaro. So I want to welcome, of course, the esteemed MP for Mayaro, MP Rushton Parray. And MP Parray, welcome to the program. And I know you have joined us on previous budget debates as well, right here in the studios, so it is no different this time. I am honored to have you on the program.
Sure. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dinesh. Thank you very much. Very good evening to all your viewers on TV Jagriti. It's always a pleasure to come and speak on matters. As you know, I do shadow trade and industry, and I do support MP Tanku from time to time on matters of the finance and economy as well. And perhaps today on this evening's program, I would want to elaborate a bit on some of the matters that was raised by the Minister of Finance yesterday in his very short, unusual contribution yesterday, specifically dealing with some areas on the IMF Article 4 report and what it means to Trinidad and Tobago and the way forward. So I'll be happy to get into some of that as we go along in the program a little later.
Yes, thank you, MP Parray. Ladies and gentlemen, you know, it is customary to recognize when we are in esteemed people, and I would want to say that MP Parray is, of course, privileged and very fortunate that he's accompanied by his wife, who is in studio with us, not on the program, but in studio looking on. So I want to recognize Nelisha, who is here with us as well. So let me turn to Dr. Bushan Singh, who, again, is not a stranger to the studios of Radio and TV Jagriti. He's not a stranger. He's an ardent supporter of the Sanatan Dharma Mahasabha. He's a supporter of Shogunas West, of course. He is not a political person. He does not engage in the politics, but he is always willing to assist wherever he can and to provide ideas and thoughts on things that he feels that he can make a contribution with respect to. So I want to say to Dr. Bushan Singh, he has a lot of qualifications. If I start, we may probably spend about 5 to 10 minutes minimum going through those qualifications. But of course, an economist and a financial analyst as well in different fields, different sectors. And so he has a wealth of experience. Bushan, I want to welcome you to the program again. And you are one of those, and I will go to Richard, but you and Richard have joined every single economic program that Shogunas West has hosted. So I want to thank you, right? Bushan and Richard are, of course, like honorary members of Shogunas West finance forums. So Bushan, welcome, and I know you as well have a very hectic schedule, so thank you for being here. Mr. Richard Ramkisson, who of course is a constituent of Shogunas West, he and his family members, a supporter of Shogunas West, a supporter again in a non-political way, if I may say so, always engaged in a lot of activities, president of the Central Sports Club, and so Richard of course runs a lot of cricket these days. So I know last weekend they would have had the match against Queen's Park, right, at the Oval. And so Richard is someone who is engaged in cricket at a professional level on a daily basis. And so today being no different, he would have had to take time off from his hectic schedule with his business and the cricketing, and of course the other charitable activities, NGO-styled activities that he engages in to be here. Richard, of course, is a financial accountant, and he as well has a lot of accolades that I could go into. He now has his master's with the highest distinction in business, small business, right? And so I know that Richard is someone who always shares his thoughts on small and medium enterprise, and tonight will be no different. Richard, I want to welcome you on the program.
Thank you very much, Dinesh, and it's always a pleasure to be on this program, sharing my thoughts together with always the esteemed panel that you gather.
Thank you, Richard. So, ladies and gentlemen, having had the pleasantries out of the way, I will just quickly say that what has happened, and we have seen within the last week and a half and leading up to the penultimate debate yesterday, we have had where Minister of Finance Colm Imbert and his government would have sought the provision of supplementary funds in the sum of $3,852,055,829. Essentially, that is $3.85 billion. So this is something that they have indicated to fund urgent and what they would call critical, recurrent and capital expenditure, which would run up to September 30th, 2023. In essence, funding that will supplement where they need the funding to finish the fiscal financial year 2023, going into the next budget debate. That was, of course, broken up into a lot of headings, and very quickly, for example, the President, some $10 million, the Auditor General, $1.5 million, Parliament, $14.5 million, Service Commissions, $3.5, Statutory Authorities, Service Commissions, almost $500,000, the Office of the Prime Minister, $125 million, the THA, Tobago House of Assembly, $100 million, Ministry of Finance, $313 million, pensions and gratuities, $1.6 million, and I could go on and on, but one of them, Ministry of National Security, they sought roughly $129 million. That is, of course, of concern to us given the current state of play when we come to discuss crime, hopefully, during the program. We have had the Office of the Attorney General and Ministry of Legal Affairs, something which has caused a lot of concern for us on the opposition. MPs, David Lee and Rushton Parray, myself, along with our political leader, Office of the AG and Ministry of Legal Affairs, $280 million. And what has caused particular concern there was $190 million of that $280 million is going towards the provision of legal fees, something which we may touch on tonight if time permits. Ministry of Education, $69 million. Ministry of Health, $692 million. Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, $600 million. I know that is an area that Dr. David Lee holds the shadow portfolio for Ministry of Energy, so we will hear from him on that. Ministry of Local Government, $160 million. Ministry of Works, $300 million. And so that is how it has been broken up. And so we will get into the debate. Before we get into specific questions, I would want to ask Dr. David Lee first, and all gentlemen, of course, but I will start with Dr. David Lee, MP for Pointe-à-Pierre. Gentlemen, I would want to invite your preliminary overview, your preliminary thoughts on what has taken place, what the country as a whole has now heard as the message from the government through the Minister of Finance as to why they're seeking this supplementation, and is it something, in your estimation, that it is going to add value to the citizenry? And if it is, do we still have concerns about how the government is going to utilize the sums utilized and where they propose to spend it? So let me start. And of course, you are not limited to the parameters I have attempted to set out, but some preliminary overviews for our listeners and our viewers. Dr. David Lee?
Thank you, Dinesh. Let me just put things in context from my perspective. Yesterday we came into the Parliament and the Minister of Finance came to the Parliament literally asking the country, the population, to give him $3.8 billion more to add to his original budget back in late September 2022 to run this country. And at the time, his budget at that time was about, I think, $57.6 billion. So yesterday he came to the country via the Parliament, and basically the request from the citizenry an additional 3.8 to take it up to, in my estimate, close to $62 billion. So he's bringing a budget in this fiscal year of $62 billion. And to add to what you had said, Dinesh, is that is the country, as the population, getting value for money for that $62 billion? And I know the panel here, especially Rushton and Richard and Dr. Singh will go through it. But one of the concerns I've always had as a normal individual, and especially as a politician in Parliament, every year we bring a budget and this government for the last 7 years, they would pass a budget, and it's no different. Last year, September, they passed a budget of $57.6 billion. And they're asking that from the citizenry. And one of the pet peeves I have always have, and still do, is that the so-called pundits, and I use that word respectfully here, all right, the economists and the chambers.
You don't want us to bring out the mukta,
No,
right?
no. And people like Dr. Bushan and Richard and so forth. And I'm not saying Dr. Bushan and Richard are one of those individuals, but they always give this government for the past 7 years, they give them glowing things about the budget, all right? And they do not really analyze the budget fully. Because they would say, like this past budget in October, the Minister of Finance came and he said, well, he nearly had a balanced budget. So he came with a deficit of $1.5 billion back in October. But that is not the true deficit of this country. All right, so yesterday now he comes for additional $3.8 billion to add to that deficit of 1.5, and that deficit could even increase further if the revenues drop, right? So, but no one from the chambers, no one from the so-called experts, do they analyze a mid-year review budget? Do they analyze even the budget that was passed in October properly, or do they analyze at the end of the fiscal year what really happened? Now, this is the budget statement that we passed in October last year. All right, and it has glowing stuff inside of here, right? That all the experts tend to give this government kudos on. And at the end of the year, as so many budgets for the past 7 years, maybe 90% of this is not achieved, and they do not analyze what happens to that budget at the end of that fiscal year. And that is one of my pet peeves with the experts, the chambers, that they do not do their job. They do not do their job properly, especially the accounting firms like Ernst & Young and Deloitte and Touche and so on and so on. They put out these things right after a budget, and then that's it, all right? So yesterday we came at $3.8 billion, and I don't know if this country is getting value for money. So I want to leave it like that and open up discussion, because when you analyze the 3.8 like Rushton would have done, you would have done, Dinesh, I would have done, a lot of that 3.8 is not for development of this country. It's just paying telephone bill, light bill, legal fees, and it's just recurrent expenditure. So it does not add any development to the country. And no one says anything about it. No one says anything about it. So that's my brief opening statement. I know I shadow energy, and I made my whole budget debate was the price of gas at the gas stations, and I really feel this government is doing an injustice to the citizenry on the price of gas at the gas station, and I will get into that later on, Dinesh.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Lee. I know you raised some topics which hopefully we can get into given the limited time. But it is a concern which I know MP Parray and myself, three of us, and I'm sure both our experts here, non-political experts, Richard and Bushan, with respect to these recurrent expenditures that we are seeing here now, and this is, I'm hoping we get into it, whether or not these are figures that could not have been tallied even last year, right, in October. Why would you not have taken some of these figures prior to, closing off the national budget?
And if I can just add, Dinesh, as you said there, Richard is an accountant. When you do a budget, or something as a budget, there are certain recurring expenditure. You can't think of it. You can't think of it. Light bill, you can do an estimate. You can do rental of offices. But this government fools the people constantly. Yes.
So we will be definitely getting into that, I suspect. MP Parray, what are your preliminary views on or overview of what we have seen over the past few days?
I just want to follow up from Chief in terms of the position that he has taken, and I want to remind Trinidad and Tobago that if you take a look at the complete 7 years of this administration, they would have expended over $400 billion. By the end of fiscal 23 in September, October this year, it's $700 billion. And again, the question we must ask, have we gotten value for money? What major project program can you stand on and say, well, look, we've gotten some value for money on this thing? What new areas of divestment, of diversification, of new industry in terms of that $400 billion spend? And Dinesh, you asked an important question about why we don't do better budgeting appropriation at the beginning of the fiscal year. For basic things, as Chief said, you must know what is the estimates for your phone, your light bill, yes, rental for buildings and so on. That rent don't change mid-year. You have that figure. But you see, it's a strategy on the Minister of Finance part. They came into government accusing the People's Partnership of having, out of whack budgets. Profligacy, I think he calls it, that we spend money all over the place. And they have had a strategy to purposely underestimate. So when you come before the Parliament in September or October of the year, you bring a budget under $58, $59 billion, 55, 56, somewhere around there. And then you say, well, look, we're doing the same thing, but we're doing it better than the People's Partnership. So, but what they do, they come mid-year and then they add $4 billion and they add $3 billion. By that time, the focus on budgeting is away, and then they get to slip in their $60 billion, $61 billion plus budget, which they're doing today. And there's another key thing I think the minister does in terms of, purposely under budgeting. He gets to move money at times. By law, we have a fixed percentage of the national budget that goes to the Infrastructure Development Fund. Not only this time, but in previous budgets in the past, he would have taken money from the IDF, which is money for capital expenditure. As the Chief Whip said, that money is used to move man machinery and allows wealth to be created from that type of investment. But when it comes mid-year and he takes back money that you've been budgeting for the IDF and put it to pay salary and wages and so on, then you lost that opportunity to create jobs, new industry and so on. So I think that is, to follow up on what Chief started with in terms of the immediate budget this year, but the overall picture in terms of how the Minister of Finance behaves when he's planning his budgets to accomplish those two things. Land us under $60 billion so he can beat up the People's Partnership for having plus $60 billion budgets. And two, he gets to move money from the IDF, which he has the power to do as Minister of Finance. And he gets away with stifling, I would say stifling a bit of the economy when he does that. And obviously yesterday in his presentation, half of it was based on the IMF Article 4 report, which obviously it's a stock report, and he spoke about the highlights, the things that he wanted to blow his trumpet on. Mm-hmm. But there's so much more in the 128-page report that should be of grave concern to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and to ask the minister and the government why you're not addressing those things. And we get into some of that as the program goes on.
Thank you, MP Parray. I want to say, ladies and gentlemen, at this juncture, what Dr. David Lee has mentioned so far in his overview on MP Parray, I know sometimes we are faced with persons saying, but why don't you all take the government to task on these things? When we have the national budget presented and we have the Standing Finance Committee, that is why the Standing Finance Committee goes as long as it does and as late as it does on a daily basis. Because on the individual items, this is where we look at the estimates for the past years and we question, well, okay, we have seen that you pay $2.5 million on this recurrent expenditure item. Why is it you are budgeting now $1 million or $1.5 million? What is it there? And you get these sort of, evasive, or if I may say flippant responses. Well, we will come back in the mid-year if we need more money. Mm-hmm. But it is something that I want people to take on board, that it is raised at the earliest possible time, and it continues to be raised in the different debates by my colleagues here, MP Parray and Dr. David Lee. Let me turn to Dr. Bushan Singh. Dr. Singh, if you could tell us, your preliminary overview of what has happened and what has been presented by the Minister of Finance.
Well, thank you, Dinesh. I wanted to look at this thing here in totality to begin with. And some things that are of concern. The original budget, first of all, the Minister of Finance is an astute and experienced politician. So he would put across things, and the budget statement is a political document, so to speak, political in terms of political strategy.
Yes.
So, but I'm not a politician, but looking at it from just the figures point of view, the original budget was, as Dr. Lee was said, was 57.685 billion, and the proposed deficit was 1.5 billion. But that was based on an oil price then of $92.50. And the gas price at that time was $6 per MMBTU. Right now, today, the last time I checked today, the oil price was around $72.14. And the gas price was at around $2.18. That's when I checked it today.
Yes.
So you see the magnitude of the problem there is much bigger, because we depend heavily on oil and gas at this point in time. So that is, the oil revenue projected at that time was 25, in the initial budget was 25 billion approximately. Non-oil revenue was around 30 billion. Capital revenue was around 1.6 billion. And now we're looking for an increase to add to the budget of 3.8 billion. So as Dr. Lee said, we are around 62 billion, right? Which is a big budget. Mm-hmm. Now, out of that, so the minister is trying to create some fiscal space. But when we look at the growth rate and what has happened, our economy declined from 2015 to now, and it has declined. That decline is around 19% there in that vicinity. When you look at the figures in terms of GDP and so on, we are operating in around 2005, 2006. When you look at the GDP, we kind of move the country back to around 2005, 2006. Is around that area that we're looking. We had a marginal growth rate, estimated growth rate was around 2.5%. But so growth rates, when we talk about growth rates, when we say growth rates as 2.5% and so on, and good, we celebrate growth. But is 2.5% enough for the average man on the street to feel like I could put aside more money, I could send my children to school, I could, comfortably go to the grocery and buy food? When we have a growth rate of 2.5%, but an inflation rate of 8.5%, especially with regard to food items, you can see the magnitude of the problem there.
Yes.
Then, when we look at the efficiency of spending, this is allocating money to a project and so on, all right, but efficiency of spending. Government spending is inherently inefficient. The new procurement legislation has been proclaimed. I would hope that it brings a greater level of efficiency, but let me see how that is working. And then we have the cost of doing business, and the cost of doing business is rising exponentially in Trinidad and Tobago, which is leading to an increase in prices, apart from inflation. And one significant factor that is increasing the cost of doing business is crime. The amount of provision and so on that we have to make for crime. So given all of that, I didn't get into debt levels and so on. We'll talk about that after, but. That's the context from which I am viewing the situation here. And I guess we'll get into the discussion further.
Yes. Thank you, Bushan. Certainly we appreciate the technical details. Yeah. And I know when I hand over to Richard, we will expect some of that as well. And yes, there are specific questions I would want to get into, Bushan, certainly in terms of what you have identified in your overview. I know in successive programs you have spoken to diversification. I probably would want to look at the non-energy sector, right? And let's see what we can how far we can get with those. But before we move on, Richard, let me ask you to chime in now. In terms of I know you are a central businessman. I know you belong to the Shigwanas Chamber, I know you are very much a community person involved in Central. Chaguanas, yes, but Central as a whole. What is your overview? How do you think this will impact, if at all, in any positive way in terms of small and medium enterprise and as a whole, the business and how people are being impacted in Central?
Thank you, Dinesh. From the outset, when you look at small and medium-sized enterprises in Trinidad and Tobago and even the world, right, Chaguanas especially, I would say that business has almost grind to a halt. The propensity to spend is not there by the consumers, and I would have expected to see some measures in this budget, media review, trying to improve the as you say, the small man on the street, increasing his propensity to spend, so that once that has increased, what you would find that there's a ripple effect that would be passed on to businesses. They would be able to go to the supermarkets or go to the hardwares, or and spend some money, go to the clothing stores. You are not seeing that happening. Even in the supermarkets, I have a few clients who own supermarkets, and long ago people used to go into the grocery and make a grocery and you spend $1,500 or $2,000. Now what you are seeing is that on a weekly basis someone is going and buying $200. They're buying as they need, and that tells you the situation of the individual and the economy.
Yes.
Now, I would have loved to see in that media review that the minister would have itemized his accomplishments, what he would have done with that $57.685 billion that he would have projected to spend. You heard nothing about that. All you heard was that I want an additional $3 billion or 3-point-something billion dollars to continue to spend. But how is that money being spent, right? I also, Bushan's touched on it. Our economy is vulnerable to the oil and gas sector. Now, I'm not an oil and gas professional, but from a basic point of view, if our economy is susceptible to the oil and gas sector, what are they doing additionally? What is this government doing additionally to raise the additional revenue, right? I haven't heard anything or saw anything on the speech that spoke about the natural gas production levels. How are we going to increase it? Is our natural gas production levels going to be at a certain point or decrease? And Bushan clearly stated from $6 to 2.18 is the natural gas price. So where are we going to get that revenue? We are not seeing anything about, MP Rushton spoke about it, and even Bushan spoke about it, about diversification. But what was interesting is that I saw a comment where he said that 2/3 of the manufacturing sector of the economy, the money that we are receiving is coming from the manufacturing sector. And I was trying to figure out 2/3, where is that coming from? Only to realize that there was a reclassification of the industrial, the petrochemical industries that are using natural gas to manufacture ammonia, urea, right? Right? And when you saw that, I was surprised. I said, but is the population is aware of these things? So it's just like a flash in the pan. 2/3. So you want to say that now your revenue is coming from 2/3 of the manufacturing sector, which was once oil and gas. So you are trying to say that your diversification policies are working, and it is really not. It's just a flash in the pan. You're just pulling wool over people's eyes, as far as I'm concerned.
80% of that 2/3 is from energy products.
Correct.
80% of that 2/3 you're referring to, it's energy products that have been reclassified. So that really sells the government's agenda that, hey, look, we're doing better in the non-energy market, which really, because of the reclassification, 80% of that is really urea, ammonia, and so on.
And that is the point I was trying to make, and I would have hoped to see, that more policies were put in place to help the SMEs, because we keep saying, and it has been bandied around that, the SMEs is a catalyst for growth in our economy, right? There are quite a number of people are hired by the SMEs, right? They create a lot of employment, they generate a lot of income, and they pay a lot of taxes. You're talking about business levy, green fund, and corporation tax. So we need to see more policies coming into place to build these businesses so that they could contribute more meaningfully to the economy.
Now, I want to thank all of you for very insightful overviews of what has been presented by the government and particularly Minister of Finance, of course. I want to get down into some of, as we say, the brass, right? People, whether you are on the ground, you are considered to be those, who are working on the streets, whether you are a laborer, whether you are, somebody who is probably, leasing your vehicles, then you perform transporting services, whatever it may be. Whether you belong to that sector, right, the food sector as a grocery owner, whatever it may be. Dr. David Lee, you raised something which sparked certainly my interest, and I know the population would be very keen on this point. You were speaking about whether or not we were actually, based on how the government has been handling the prices of gas, whether we, whatever you may be using, whether it's premium, whether it's super, diesel, whatever it is, are we actually spending too much at the pumps? That is a point I know you hammered home yesterday in your usual fiery, style, and you sent that point across, and it sparked my interest, both in content and the delivery. So I want to ask you, maybe I could indulge you a little bit to address that point you were making yesterday.
Sure. Thank you, Dinesh, and before I get into my point, I just want to touch a little bit on what Richard said about the SMEs. The SMEs, I agree with you that the SME is very critical for our economy. I consider myself part of the SME. I'm sure I know Russia is very large in the business world, but I don't know, I still find out he's
larger of the smaller SMEs.
Right.
Larger
Okay.
of the small SMEs.
But the SMEs plays a critical role in the stability of our country, just like how the middle class sector plays a role in the stability of our country. The SME does that, in my view. And under this government for the last 7 years, they have done two things in my view. They have eroded the middle class and have eroded the SMEs, right, to the debt of the SMEs. And they have not, if you look at what this government, and I don't want to get into it too much, but if you look at what this government does with the larger conglomerates, they feed the larger conglomerates everything. So if you're an investor and you hold shares in those large conglomerates, you win, because all you have to do is sit back and wait on your dividends, and you get funding. And I say no more at this point in time. So the SMEs are no more in Trinidad. You just have to go through the malls in our country, and you see right here, about 5 minutes away from this studio, you have one of the largest malls in Trinidad, Trin-City Mall.
Trin-City.
And you just walk through there, and the amount of shops that are vacant, closed up, abandoned, right? It's amazing. And that tells the signal of what is the state of our play in our country as for SMEs. So I leave that there, and I'm sure you all can elaborate, and Rushton will. But yesterday in my debate in Parliament, and it's something that as I shadow energy, I've been keeping my pulse on it with my team, and it is really, at the end of the day, what is the value, that the price we are paying at the pump in our gas stations for super and premium. And when you look back, and Dr. Bushan made a point, today oil is what, $72? Yeah. $72. And we're not talking about the revenue side of our country. And there were two statements made by the Minister of Finance and the Prime Minister last year, and the Minister of Finance came in a ministerial statement in the Parliament on April 8, 2022, and it's labeled Adjustment to Fuel Prices. So on April 8, 2022, Imbert came to the Parliament to increase the fuel prices at the pump on April 8, 2022. And at that time, in around April, and Rushton could bear with me or guide me, at that time you had the the Ukrainian war in full blown, right? And the prices of oil and gas, along with all commodities, was blowing off the roof, right? Everything in the world, prices were going up through the roof, and you had the supply chain issues and so forth. So Imbert came in the parliament on April last year, 2022, to increase prices, right? At that point in time, in April 8, the price of premium that we were paying was $5.75 a litre, April last year. Super gasoline was $4.97 at the pump, and diesel was $3.41. He came on April 8 and increased it to $6.18 for premium, from $5.75 to $6.18. Super from $4.90 to $6.09. Okay, so he increased it on the April 8, and in his statement then on April 8, and also in October when the Prime Minister debated in October, he also mentioned these prices. So what they said on April 8, and I have to take the Minister of Finance at his word, because as Dr. Bushan knows, he's a very shrewd individual, and I think he professes to be one of the brightest individuals in Trinidad and Tobago. All right?
A wizard, yes.
And he's the Minister of Finance. Okay? So what he said back then, in April 2022, and I want to read it, his words in the studio here tonight. Imbert said, if unsubsidized, meaning that there is no subsidies at the pump, the retail price of premium gasoline should vary from $6.18 per litre at an oil price of $80 a barrel. Right? So what he's saying back then, that you would remember that at that point in time, premium we were paying $5.75. So he's now coming to justify increasing that price to $6.18. So he is saying that at $80 a barrel, we should be paying $6.18, okay, for premium. Now, at that point in time in April, I think the price of oil was over the $90 mark. I think it was between $90 to $95. So he is saying that if at $80, what he's telling the country, at $80 a barrel, we are subsidizing you. So we're keeping the price at $6.18 at April, at $80 a barrel. Because at that point in time, he's telling the world, he's telling us, the price of a barrel of oil was over $90. Okay? So he's saying it's still subsidized at that point in time. He came back in the budget in October and increased it again to premium to $7.75 in October last year. Right? So it went from $5.75 in April to $5, from $5.75 to $7.75 in the October budget. The super gasoline that we pay at the pump in April, before he increased it, was $4.97, and in October he came and increased it to $6.97. Right? So we went from $4.97 to $6.97. And he is saying that we still subsidizing it because the price of fuel is over $90 a barrel. I have tracked the price of oil, since December last year to the ending of April, and the average price is under $80 a barrel. So what the country is not aware of, and I challenged Imbert yesterday in the parliament. I said, if I am wrong, I apologize. I would apologize. So tell me, when he winding up, tell me if I am wrong. Now I was waiting to say, well, I know this gentleman Imbert never admits he's been wrong. And I thought he would have come with some creativity to refute my numbers. Up to now, I'm still waiting. He skirted over. I mean, he just said, well, yeah, member for appointed pair making noise. But he never refuted, and I challenged him. I said, if I am wrong, tell me I am wrong, and I will apologize. And I'm still waiting. So that tells me that there's something going on with this government and the price at the pump that we pay that is not right. And I am saying, I said it in the parliament yesterday, the consumers, we, this population, the citizenry, the driving public, we are overpaying prices at the pump. We are literally subsidizing this government. And that is why I asked the question, why did they want an additional $600 million to add to the $1 billion under the heading fuel subsidy? Now, I don't know if that $1.6 billion that they have spent is to cater for some arrears that was going on years ago. It cannot be current from October to now. We literally should be in a surplus, meaning we should be getting back money. And the prices at the pump should be reduced, because the Prime Minister said in his budget debate in October that he was going to have at the gas station monthly an average price of oil, right? So what the fuel price would be based on the movement of the price of oil in the world. And that has not happened. Yes. That has not happened. So I am saying we are not being subsidized at the pump. I think we subsidize in the government. Now the only fuel that still has some subsidy on is diesel. Accept that. Accept that, because the price of diesel before April was $3.41. Today at the pump is $5.35. But we also get funding from oil companies in a fund called the what they call it, the petroleum oil fund, right? So we get money from the oil companies. That was catered for this back in 1974, all right, under Dr. Eric Williams. So we do get some revenue to cater for subsidies. And I have said that yesterday in the parliament in my debate, that you should be getting funding to take care of the diesel subsidy. So in my view, I am still waiting for Minister of Finance to say the member for Pointe-Noire is wrong. I mean, and if I am sure if I was wrong, he would have made sure that was mentioned when he was winding up yesterday. So I am saying, Dinesh, at the end of it all, I'm telling the population that the prices at the pump in the gasoline for super and premium should be much lower. At least based on the price of oil it is right now, we should be paying at least 80 cents less in respect of premium, super, and premium at least $1.50 less. And that is a substantial amount of money. Savings for the normal driver on anything. Per liter. Okay? So I am still waiting on Imber to come and say that I am talking rubbish. All right? He loves to come and say that. Yet to find, I was amazed in his wind-up. He didn't refute what I said.
Yes.
So I am sure I am onto a good thing. All right? And the population should be aware of this. And I will say more about this at a later date.
Well, Dr. David Lee, thank you so very much. I mean, certainly, ladies and gentlemen, what we have heard is a historical perspective in terms of what we have seen in the increases in the price of gas. Dr. David Lee, of course, going back for 2022, showing what was the respective prices per barrel, right, for oil prices per barrel. And in April itself, last year, 2022, we would have seen a jump in the prices, and then we had it again in October. Doc, what I would like to ask you is that you have traced it well. You have called on the Minister of Finance to address this issue. What really is happening with the subsidy at the pumps, and why are we paying the values that we are paying? In terms of that price per liter, that persons can actually pay less. For the average citizen, how do you think, are you able to break down for us what it would mean in terms of, when you have to fill your tank, and what the monies you save, where it can be utilized? And even in small and medium enterprise, I think we will get the others to chime in, but in your estimation, what are some of the immediate impacts that you think would benefit citizens if they ought to be paying this lower price at the pump?
Well, right off the bat, Dinesh, I mean, when we all go to the pump to fill up our vehicles, and to be fair to all of us and every citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, that's why we have so many cars on the road, because of crime. Because of crime. So it's not to say you can substitute using public transport I mean, how many of us would want to allow our children to use public transport given the state of crime in our country? All right, so to answer your question in a way is that actually you would see a lot of savings in your pocket, and then that will then, as Richard had said, it could stimulate the whole economy, all right, in the movement of how you buy goods. You know, Richard made a point that long ago you might go to the supermarket and you spend $1,000, $1,500. Now you buy the bare necessities, and because money is so tight in our country for consumer spending, so that if you have more money at the pump, that you can then pass on in your daily livelihood. It's a good point. I haven't calculated what would be the actual cost savings if the pump will go down, and I will do that. But I want to say that the price going down on the pump, Dinesh, is because the Prime Minister said so. It's not to say he did not say. When he made his statement in the Parliament, he said once the price of oil starts to drop, the price at the pump would also start to drop. So it's not to say he is saying that it's constant based on the increase that they did back in October. He gave the country the hope that when the price of oil starts to go down, the price at the gas stations would also go down. So he has not kept his word, and they're not good at keeping their word. They're not good at keeping their word. They make lovely promises and fool the people, but they are yet to really keep their promises to this country.
Dr. David Lee, of course, thank you very much for that analysis and of a topic that it really affects all of us. Yes, Bushan.
An important point with savings and gasoline and so on is that when people have money in their pockets, if you save $50 every time you go to fill your tank, and that is money in your pocket, it'll add up over a year. That also increases consumer confidence. At least you could, even if you don't spend the money, you save the money, well, that increases consumer confidence. But overall, when we talk about this, the oil and gas, from 2015 to now, to present, in terms of gas production, our gas production has declined by about 30%. Oil would have declined by around 34% in that vicinity, somewhere between 33 and 35%. And also LNG would have declined, I would say in the 35-36% range. So that's significant. And when you look at the international prices in terms of oil and gas, our energy revenues from December 2022, it was 6.4 billion, and in January 2023, it went down to 1.7 billion. So that was a significant drop in our revenues.
Almost 5 billion
from energy alone. Now that 5 billion, that was in fiscal 2022-2023, which is the current fiscal. So that's 5 billion shortfall in revenue at that point in time, right? And when you look at so there are a number of the minister is trying to create fiscal space. So the prices at the pumps are one. We have the Revenue Authority that is coming. We've heard that the employees in the Board of Inland Revenue have already gotten or started receiving their letters. We have the issue of the Revenue Authority. We have the issue of the imminent increase in electricity rates, the possible increase in utility rates. We have another issue that is burning, and that is with regard to NIS reform and the retirement age. And all of this is going to take some type of money to do there. And it's like, everything is I mean, I don't want to paint a picture of gloom and doom, we will survive, but the fact of the matter is that the fiscal space is tightening. when we look at what is happening in the energy sector, Trinidad and Tobago, we have to realize that we are a mature producer, so our revenues are declining, and this is why, in terms of budgetary policy, diversification is a must. And if you were to take away, as MP Rushton Parray was talking about, you take away the energy sector from that manufacturing figures, 2/3. The current manufacturing sector minus the energy input is not enough. It is not big enough to support or to take up that shortfall from the energy sector, and that paints a serious problem for us in terms of how to manage where we're going to get that shortfall from. And the strategy appears to be, by reducing subsidies or eliminating subsidies, profits perhaps on some of these things, and taxation. While for 2023, the personal income tax allowance went up from 84,000 to 90,000, I believe, for 2023. But people, that is not something that they're going to see immediately. That is, at the end. But that will just add a very, very little cushion to those at the bottom of the earning pyramid. But generally, the population is going to be asked to churn out more in terms of taxes. There's less to go on. The pie is getting smaller, and that creating that fiscal space is, the population is burdened not just by taxes. If us taxes was okay to a certain extent, but remember we have to factor in inflation, and a lot of this inflation is imported inflation, and that is also something that is really becoming a burden around the small person's neck in Trinidad and Tobago. We talk about crime, we talk about this is adding to the burden that people have to deal with.
Bushan, I appreciate the little intervention there. We will come back to some of that because I'm hoping to hear you tell us somewhat about the performance of the non-energy sector, particularly the manufacturing sector, but we will get to that in an attempt, and I know time is quickly moving along, so I wouldn't give too much of a prelude, MP Parray, but we have heard a lot about the latest recommendations coming from the IMF and the IMF report. I do recall yesterday you marshalling in a sort of bullet point fashion yesterday, because when we debate in the parliament, we have to work with certain rulings of yesterday it would have been the deputy speaker. And I say this so that people will understand it is not that we go and we make presentations. Ideally, we would love to, but it doesn't work like that in the parliament. And I have to commend MP Lee and MP Parray because they did a phenomenal job yesterday in marshalling some of these points. But I would like, for the benefit of this forum, if you could tell us a little bit about some of these IMF recommendations and really how does it translate to us, and what really is the government doing or not doing that should be taken on board by the Minister of Finance and the Cabinet.
Okay. So yesterday the Minister came and he pegged half of his contribution on the concluding report, which is a 5-page document. It was released on Friday, I believe, last Friday. And what these reports are is what you call a stock report. A stock report is like your executive summary. And in your executive summary, you are giving a few highlight points. Now, the highlighted points that was presented to the minister, good news is so far and few for this administration that any glimmer of light that comes, there is a whole orchestra and angels blowing trumpet at the end of the day. And that's what the minister sought to do. So he talked about the performance of his government, and the fact that there was, and I think Bushan mentioned in terms of growth in 21, 22, and there's an expected 3.5% growth rate in this fiscal 23. But you see, when you look at the staff report is 128 pages. And the minister accused us yesterday, including a citizen of this country who is entitled to his own view, a senior economist at the University of the West Indies. And he says what they does want to do is to nitpick everything and read every comma, semicolon, and dot. And my response to the Honorable Minister was that responsible policymakers do just that. An irresponsible policymaker reads the cliff notes or the executive summary. Responsible policymakers read the entire document. And it is interesting, Bushan raised some issues a little while ago, and I want to tell you something that the Article 4 staff report identified. And they identified a few things that the government must be doing. NIS reform. Spoke about NIS reform in terms of moving the retirement age. Now, if you see what's going on in France, France is almost at civil war under the Macron administration. We have failed to address that up to today. So that is something that is looking, it's something that's mentioned in this Article 4 report. Property tax is something that is mentioned in the Article 4 report that the government must pursue, and that is coming on stream this year. Something that we've forgotten, the gambling and betting tax. Now that is something which is also mentioned in the report as on the to-do list this year. Increase in utility rates, TNTEC and WASA. That is part of the IMF recommendation. And then most of all, the TTRA is another part of the recommendations inside it. But the minister wouldn't say that. Now, the minister has come in the past and said that we are under no IMF control, no IMF rules. But when you read the staff report, while it is not mandatory in terms of the report, it is telling the minister, if you want to achieve the objectives of your growth rate that we have identified, you have to do these things. There are one or two pieces that I just want to speak about in terms of this expected 3.5% in growth in this fiscal year. 2.9% of that is hinged on energy prices, on energy production, right? And the data from this staff report was collected in December 2022. And as Bushan now identified, our revenues moved from 6 billion to 1 billion in between December and January. And the reason for that is that the world changed in terms of the elasticity of energy prices in January of 2023. So nothing in this report that they are hinging on our energy and our energy production and growth in terms of our GDP under the energy heading. None of that in this report stands ground today. Because the question is, and probably Dr. Lee will talk about that when he comes back, in where is the new production coming from? Manatee is 4 years down the road. The North Tobago Woodside Fine is still at the negotiation stage, which is probably another 5 to 7 year window. Dragon gas is probably almost at a stillbirth. I understand the energy secretary of the United States was here 2 days ago. I wonder if Minister Young took the opportunity to ask him, hey, can we revisit the Venezuelan arrangement? Because, I mean, they have peddled this conversation that the opposition don't want nothing good for this country and that we don't want the dragon gas. But that's a fallacy. Dr. Lee, in his initial press briefing at the announcement, I was, hey, this is a good thing, but we have concerns based on the arrangements and how the government was operating with the government of Venezuela. That was the problem we have. Nothing wrong with the gas, with the dragon gas. So the point is, we have no gas on the horizon for next 3 years or 4 years. So where is this 2.9% in terms of GDP on the energy map? Where is that going to come from? So it's not going to be there. Now, why do we mention these things? The problem is that when you are making policy, and if we are happy with what's happening with our revenue from energy, we're not going to touch the conversation of diversification, our marine sector, our agricultural sector. So by reading the data wrong or by just gleaning what the minister does, he doesn't speak to policy. And in the IMF staff report again, they also press the government of Trinidad and Tobago to put policy in place for your diversification. What is your policy for your ease of doing business? Climate change. all of these things require the minister to come in the media review and take the staff report and say, well, you know, media, look, we need to strengthen our green position. We have to strengthen our position on hydrogen. We have to strengthen our position on agriculture. Agriculture is still less than 1% of our national budget. So, you know, you cannot take the Article 4 report as presented by the minister and all the wonderful things. I mean, he went to town, not in the debate, a couple of weeks ago, and he boasted that, you know, the CSO has identified that we are at full employment. And full employment, according to the ILO, is anything under 5% in terms of your unemployment rate. So the CSO gave us 4.7%. So he comes and he issues this wonderful Twitter post that, you know, the good work of this government, you know, we had full employment in this country. But all you have to do is watch around. Watch around, and if you look at the transfers and subsidies alone in this media review was $2.1 billion. Out of the 3.8, 2.1 was transfers and subsidies. And when you do the maths, we have 65,000 people on food cards. I doubt any of those persons working. That's the first thing. The NIB has identified over the last 4 years about 100,000 persons have dropped off the labor force in terms of the deregistration at the NIB office. And as MPs, we see for the month 50, 60, 100 people coming saying that they are not working, I need help with some hampers, I need this. You walk around in rural communities today, you drive around in front of every house. There is now a shed. People selling vegetables, tomatoes, bygone, because people they're not working and they have to try and they're eking out an income. So it is really, you know, the minister is very disingenuous to come and tell Trinidad and Tobago that because of some magical policy of his government that we are at full employment in this country, and that is a farce. And again, if you are not in touch with ground, I mean, something I wanted to tell the minister yesterday, but I didn't get a chance. You would think that a man of his stature, his size, he would be closer to the man on the ground.
Yes.
To understand the needs, and he's not doing that. So we were to call the minister out and say, look, don't read the executive summary. Take the entire report and put that into your policy position for your government to take us forward. So I will leave that here, and you know, we'll pass on and we'll discuss some other issues after.
Rushton, thank you very much for that. And I urge people to look at Dr. David Lee's presentation. We have the Parliament channel, and I know it will be shown from time to time. You access it on YouTube and Parliament Live YouTube, and of course MP Rushton Parray. And I was very impressed with the presentations that you all delivered yesterday. So I'm happy that, you know, listening yesterday and today, having you all on the program to touch on something that was stated in the debate. I really frown upon, I know it seems to have become commonplace for Minister Imbert to insult members of the public, to insult commentators. It's one thing to disagree with what is being put out there, but another thing to insult persons. And I mean, you spoke about a senior economist. That senior economist's name was called, I mean, this is a person who has given a lot of time and effort on different NGOs. Mm-hmm. He has given a lot of time to the University of the West Indies. He has actually joined us on this program in prior incarnations of this program, and held discussions, very lively discussions, very fruitful discussions with us. He's one of those senior economists that if you call him and you tell him now, you say, look, I want you to come on our program tomorrow, he will not say no, he will say yes. But one of the things he always tells us, he'll be like, you know, say, MP Rambally, if I am coming onto any discussion forum, I am going to call it as I see it. So if it is the debate goes in a direction and I feel I need to be critical of your regime, right, that you know, would have been in the corridors of power, don't expect me to say otherwise. I say that in the context of this is the kind of persons we have in the society willing to contribute, calling for public debate on these important issues, but all you could do is hide behind parliamentary privilege and insult these persons. And the second point is, and both MP Lee and MP Parray spoke about this, there's a dragon gas deal propaganda, which is that, and it is the government that is really, you know, propagating this, that we are somehow not in support of, finding new gas, finds. We are not supporting the dragon gas deal. We don't want it to succeed. When for all intents and purposes, every single statement that was issued by both of you in the early stages when they announced that the U.S. was somehow going to give possibly a 2-year latitude that you would allow some negotiations to take place between the government of Trinidad and Venezuela. I recall both of you distinctly saying that this is good news, but we were concerned about whether it will translate into something tangible for the people, knowing that there are certain parameters that the government will have to negotiate within, and knowing, Venezuela will of course want to get their pound of flesh, right? And that is how it works. But ladies and gentlemen, I say that before I forget, because I don't want people to go away with any of that propaganda. At all times, all members, including the leader of the opposition, we are happy if there is, gas find, if there is deals which we can explore certain gas fields, oil and gas, and therefore we are not in the business of saying no to when you have dragon gas that we don't want it to succeed. Far from. So I believe, MP Parray, you would have attended that a recent energy conference as well. So I say this to show the interest of the opposition, both Dr. Lee, who shadows energy, and MP Parray, who shadows trade and industry, and co-shadows along with MP Tanku, Ministry of Finance. So gentlemen, I want to leave both of you, and I want to let me go to Richard to give us a little bit of overview. Richard, I really want to at some point, if possible, that you can tie in, this issue of crime and how it affects businesses in Chaguanas. I want you to hopefully spend some time on this whole issue of VAT refunds, right? Because there's a certain limit on the VAT refunds, and how is that going to benefit businesses that have been waiting for a long time. I'm hoping that you can touch on the small and medium enterprise as a whole. What has happened now with this mid-year review? Anything tangible that they will benefit from?
Thank you, Dinesh. When I listened to the mid-year review, and it was announced that, with the hands up in the air, that the VAT refunds debt, $7.8 billion was going to be cleared. It was amazing, that it was a ray of light for businesses. But when you do a critical analysis of the VAT refunds itself and what the minister is perpetuating, it is difficult to agree with him, that he's going to settle that entire debt, right? For the viewers who don't understand the VAT system, it's a very simple system. Expenses attract input VAT, and income attracts output VAT. And the difference is either you are in a net payment payable position or you're in a net refundable position. And 99% of businesses should, at the end of a 6-period VAT, be in a net payable position. You have a lot of importers who are importing, and most of the time they would be in a refund position over a period of time. And that is how this VAT debt has been generated. When you look at what he has said, my understanding is that every month at the VAT office, maybe between 300 million to 500 million, between that, is allocated for VAT refunds. But you have to also understand every month a VAT return is filed. And that debt could either be a payment or a refund. So the refund keeps increasing, and that is why if you don't pay proper attention to the refund status, it will continue to grow. And I can remember at one point in time it was just $3 billion. Then it went to 5, and now we are almost at $8 billion. Now, something very important that I observed, and I observed that the minister did not really get into it, right? He indicated that $250,000 and above VAT bonds will be paid, and under $250,000, you will get a check, cash. But, when you look at the data, he didn't present any data. Out of that $7.8 billion, how much of that comprises of the 250? What element of that is 250 and less? And what element of that is above 250? How much people is going to get bonds? How much people is going to get cash? My understanding is that a lot of the businesses, especially the SMEs, would have been filing VAT returns and refunds less than 250,000. So what is the composition of that 7.8 billion dollars in terms of the 250,000 less than the 250 above? He has to indicate to us how much people is going to get at. And I was in contact with a couple of my close colleagues and business colleagues, and they are very excited because he said between May and June he's going to clear that debt, 250,000. And I'm thinking, but if only, let's for argument's sake, 500 million per month is released, that is $1 billion. So you are telling me that only $1 billion in VAT deficits, VAT refunds, is in under 250,000? If you look at the data, I think it would not be correct. So, yes, some people is going to get refunds. And then now he's perpetuating this bond. This bond was done before. How much people benefited out of it? And now you are saying 7 years. So he's just putting that debt forward, passing that debt on to somebody else to pay at some point, because those bonds will mature. It's not cash. You can't use it for cash unless you go to the bank and the bank offer you a special rate. Normally it will be with less than a 10% deficit, right? Give you a 10% reduction and take the bond and hold it for the period of time, because I think he attracted an interest rate of 3-point-something% onto it. So to me, businesses are in for a shock over the next couple of months. People will realize that, look, May and June I'm looking for these big checks. If some people have 200, 300,000, 400,000 in VAT refunds they get, and they might not be seeing it. Some people will get, but a lot of people would not get it. And again, it depends on the releases of the Ministry of Finance and how they're going to allocate those refunds. And then now it depends also on the public servants. How the public servants deals with the listing that they get. Are they going to be instructed, or you know what? How is it going to happen? So you know, it's something, it's debatable, and it's argumented, and I think a lot of people might be in for a shock over a period of time. And I am almost 100% sure that debt, that 7.8 billion, is going to climb, because the debt keep increasing every month, because the VAT periods run with an even number and an odd number. So every month a VAT return is filed and a debt is generated. And if you're not treating with the debt at instant, it will continue to develop and get larger and larger. So I am seeing, yes, some of the debt would be relieved, but the debt would continue to increase, and we would have some issues going on the line. And you know, SMEs, one of the major things that is affecting SMEs in terms of development and growth is cash flow. And if your cash flow is not, if you don't adjust or deal with your cash flow issues, you're going to have severe problems. You will have to either go to the bank or some financial institution to assist you. And the banks, we know what is happening with the banks and those financial institutions. They have onerous and burdensome policies for businesses to access overdrafts and loan. And you know, coming to that, the banks are asking for annual returns, certificates of registration, etc. from businesses. And that is where the ease of business comes in. The government has instituted a new system called the cross system. And my understanding is that, from my personal experience, it has become very difficult to access and deal with. And I heard today that they have reverted back to the old system up to 2022 December to file your annual returns and get information from the Registrar General, even incorporating companies. What does that tell you? That the system has failed, and you are causing burdensome or hardship on businesses in getting their documents. And the banks understand what is happening at the Registrar General, and they are still requesting businesses and saying, indicating to them, you need to have your annual returns, you need to have this, you have that, to ensure that your facilities are extended. And I could tell you for a fact, some facilities were not extended, and those businesses are almost at the stage of shutting down because they cannot access their overdraft or loans because of these simple issues. And that is where the ease of business comes in. And, you know, Dr. Lee spoke about it. Businesses are just shutting down, and we are getting rid of the SMEs. When we are supposed to be doing instituting policies to assist these SMEs so that they can grow. You know, and Dinesh, I just want to touch on the crime issue, right? You know, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce indicated that because of crime, approximately 30% of small or medium-sized businesses are failing. And that is a big, when I read that document, it hit me like a gunshot, you know, and we could see that it is happening day by day. You know, when we look at, you know, there are two types of crime that affects businesses. And it's because of the state of the economy. If your economy is not functioning and people are not happy, workers are not happy, your workers, you have pilferage, you have fraud within your business. So that is one type of crime. And then the other part of the crime is where the external crime, where you have invasions and people actually try to rob you. And that is an issue that is affecting most businesses. And as a business individual, what do? You now have to try to protect yourself. How do you protect yourself? You spend a lot of money now on cameras, security systems, actually hiring security guards, putting a lot of internal controls within your business to ensure that even your workers are not interfering with your little cash. And that is a big cost to businesses. And what do businesses do? They pass that cost onto the consumer. So the price of goods will increase. And once the price of goods increase, you'll find that the consumer now will find it difficult to access your products, and maybe will go to another one, or just forgo the product altogether and look at an alternative. And that is what is happening in Trinidad and Tobago right now. Crime, there is a cost of crime. Besides a financial cost, there's also a social cost. And that social cost is basically causing the population to want to seek to live elsewhere, live in other countries. And you find that our intelligent people, right, what we termed as the economists would term a brain drain. And that is basically happening in our country at the moment. And, you know, an issue that I looked at recently, I was preparing a financial statement. And in 2021, when I looked at the cost of sales of the client compared to 2022, when those freight costs went up, it drastically increased the cost of sales by almost 100%. People were literally not making any profits. And, you know, I know that clarion calls were made to the government to maybe address that issue. I know Guyana would have addressed it, where they would have limited the pre-freight increases and charge a duty and VAT. But our government choose to deal with it as a windfall at the detriment of our businesses. And, you know, Bushan used a word here, the fiscal space, you know. And, you know, when you look at the fiscal space and you see an opportunity where you can earn additional income, and that is how the government looks at it, they would have just left that as it is and just continue to generate those income. You know, so there's a lot of issues that is moving around, and, you know, we have to just keep analyzing and look at it and hope that at some point that the government will institute fiscal policies to improve and to assist these businesses to grow.
Richard, I want to point out, and I know we can't get into crime debate, but today, being 11th of May, 2023, we have had 222 murders recorded, at least up to when this program, you know, started. I raised that in the context of, you know, you spoke about crime and the fact that small and medium enterprise, they have to invest now to combat the criminal elements, to be proactive to combat criminal elements. In terms of that cost, it is one thing that it will be transferred to the consumer, but are there situations of where, because we are talking about violent crime, to your knowledge in central Trinidad, which I know has been overridden with home invasion, and you have certain instances of extortion of certain businessmen, and there are other instances of robbery on the whole, right, at their business places. Are you aware, and if you are, what kind of, is it a growing trend that we are seeing that businesses are closing on account of crime because they can no longer combat the criminal elements? I know there's one place in Felicity in particular where that business establishment, I met them recently, They have continuously been, not that they are not preparing and putting systems in place, but I have visited them on at least 3 occasions in the last year and a half, and the cause for visiting them is because they have been robbed. So, you know, in a situation like that, have businesses closed, small and medium enterprise closed because of crime?
Yes, a number of businesses are closing, and it's because of fear. They basically, I mean, I know that recently you would have held two town hall meetings, and when you observe the amount of people that are attending these meetings now, 200, 250, 300 people, it is sending a signal to us and the government that people are afraid and they are concerned, right? Because some of those crimes were described in detail, and it is really heinous. And I mean, I as a businessman are taking so much precautions to ensure that, you know, sometimes you have to forego a sale, or you instruct your staff, you know, try to assess what is happening on the outside before the customer comes in. And that is causing a serious issue with businesses. And I know for a fact that a lot of businesses in Central especially are closing their doors, and people are deciding to look elsewhere. And I mean, they are looking, and that is what I'm talking about, that social aspect. People are trying. I know there are a lot of opportunities abroad. You don't have to have an educational background, but once you have a capital background, that you can invest in a foreign country. So they are looking for direct foreign investment from us, and they are getting it, right? When we as a country should be looking for direct foreign investment to improve our economy, we are losing. There's a severe capital flight that is taking place right now in Trinidad and Tobago. A lot of businesses are closing, and when a business closes, the poor man feels it, because the 5 and the 10 and the 15 employees have to go on the breadline. And then now you, as MP Rushton indicated earlier, you've seen a lot of sheds all over the road coming up. Pepper sauce, achar, mango, you know, and that is a signal also to the extent what is happening. And I know for a fact that a lot of people are being laid off. And, you know, I know the MP has a peeved about this full employment thing. But as you say, people are not really on the ground, and they're not observing what is happening with our country. And we have to be paying attention, and we have to be doing activities that could generate and help these individuals. And now even when you look at the migrant population, I mean, you are seeing they are on the road literally begging and creating issues. They're coming at your businesses and begging and want to sell something, and then when you don't participate or partake of it, they are getting very aggressive. So that is another thing that is causing anxiety within the business community. So yes, Dinesh, I agree with you. There are a lot of businesses that are closing, not only in Central, but all parts of the country. And I like to use as an example, if you drive along that highway going down to South, we must look at all the billboards, see how much of the billboards are empty. And that is a sign to tell you that people are not spending money, they are closing, and they're not advertising. Look at it and you will see it. Yeah, that is a fact. So we have to be looking at all these things. We can't be just be with our heads in the ground. We have to observe what is happening, and it's a difficulty that all of us is facing.
Thank you, Richard. I really appreciate your investment of time in terms of analyzing the VAT refunds and how that will translate. There's a joke I will make at the end of the program in relation to VAT refunds. Now let me go quickly to Dr. Singh, Dr. Bushan Singh. Bushan, I would like you, you know, I know we have limited time, but I don't want to force you to be too concise, because I want you to tell us about the performance of the non-energy sector, particularly, as I mentioned before, the manufacturing sector, and hopefully we can also touch on the underemployment as well issue.
Well, if you allow me to reverse it first, to talk a little bit about the underemployment.
Sure.
MP Parray and Richard, they both spoke about unemployment. Now, MP Parray is correct in terms that under 5%, all right, you consider it full employment. So, but the 4.9% really, that is really a academic number. That definition is really an academic definition. Because we have the labor participation rate is just over 50%, right? The labor participation rate is just over 50%. And what you're actually seeing now, MP Parray spoke about the number of food cards, the exact case of the number of food cards and so on. And that's a symptom. If you have that amount of food cards and you have a labor participation rate of just over 50%, and you're talking about the academic figure of employment being less than 5%, that's a symptom of underemployment. That is, there's grave underemployment in Trinidad and Tobago. Underemployment simply means you might have people working, but they are unable to make ends meet. The wages that they get, they cannot live for a whole month or week or whatever, or fortnight on those wages. The wages are too small. The expenses are too great. They're looking for, sometimes I know of a person, they work almost 24 hours a day. They have a day job and they have a night job, and this person is, a semi-professional, right? And they work both day and night to try to make ends meet. It is, I know in some security companies, I know of a particular individual in a security company that's not getting paid. They are month in arrears with salaries. Right? So underemployment is a big problem. Now, to move towards the performance of the non-energy sector, if we take out the energy component, the non-energy sector, one of the main challenges that they were facing is obtaining foreign exchange. Now, the government came up with a plan through the Exim Bank, and that has been able, the manufacturing sector, working with the Exim Bank, they have been able to satisfy to a certain extent some of the foreign exchange requirements. But the other participants in the non-energy sector, they still have to buy US at inflated rates. Sometimes the going rate might be $8. Again, if you have to buy US at $8, it means that your cost of goods and cost of sales and so on are going to increase. Really, what we have to look at here is a greater diversification schedule, a greater diversification effort. There was once upon a time, some years ago, the government had come up with seven sectors, and it was, film and printing and packaging and all of those things, and that quietly fell off the radar. I don't know what became of those sectors, and they had the marine sector and so on, and it quietly fell off the radar. But right now, even if you have oil and gas to last you 100 years, I'm not quite sure that oil and gas would be the energy choice of the future. So it becomes critically important that we look into diversification. Another point here, when we look at the cost of doing business, electricity rates are going to increase, but there was a lot of talk about transitioning towards a green economy, transitioning towards sustainability, and we had all of these things with ESG and so on. And in terms of environment and sustainability, there were in the budget there was some there was in the initial budget there was talk about the renewables. Yet still, the feed-in tariff has not come into play as yet. So you cannot legally generate your own electricity. A business that wants to generate its own electricity cannot do that. Even solar panels are not so expensive. Solar panels are relatively cheap, and the technology already exists where you could generate electricity. And this is a quick win. If we want to move to the future, we should get in some type of feed-in tariff as as government policy, so that we could lessen the burden on TNTech. People could generate some of their own electricity and might be even able to earn some money by selling some of that electricity back onto the grid. This will help individuals, it will help SMEs, it will help big business, it will help the manufacturing sector, especially businesses like the manufacturing sector sometimes that require large amounts of power. Right? Large amounts of power. So, in other words, we could kill two birds with one stone, so to speak, in terms of reducing the subsidy by people using less electricity, and also giving businesses a chance to become more efficient. Now, I suspect why the feed-in tariff hasn't come into place as it is because of the contract with TGU, take or pay, right? But we have to find some way to negotiate past that, because you can't hold the country to ransom, right? Technology is changing, the business environment is changing, and to give the non-energy sector a chance, to give diversification a chance, we have to allow, creativity to take place, innovation to take place, new ways of doing business. We can't be stuck in the old paradigm. We have to change the current paradigm, and looking at ways for both the government. For example, if you look at the Mount Hope Medical Complex, could you imagine the amount of power they could generate if they were to, install solar panels or some type of solar system on their roof or something like that? The amount of power that they could generate. The Red House, the Parliament, right? Some type, and there are new, ways of doing this thing. It doesn't have to be you're covering your whole roof in this. There are new, aesthetically pleasing ways, and these are ways that you could, one, start businesses getting more efficient, dealing with subsidies or removing subsidies by placing the burden on the businesses to generate their own power, and moving the whole economy in a new direction, right? And in terms of the manufacturing sector, it'll get them more competitive too, right? They'll be able to access now talking about accessing foreign markets and so on. I mean, they're doing a lot of work. The manufacturing sector that just had a trade show and so on in the Dominican Republic and so on. But still, it is of not the manufacturing sector by themselves is not of critical mass where they could generate, could replace the energy sector, right? So we have to grow that. That is something that we need to work on as a matter of urgency. As we have established the Loran Manatee and the Dragon gas deals and so on. That is not going to happen tomorrow, right? In 5 to 7 years' time, our manufacturing sector should double in size. Exports should double in size. That should be a target, right? To double in size. If I like to work with numbers, and if we set targets for the manufacturing sector and so on, and work with some strategic plan, we could enhance the diversification effort.
I want to thank you for that. I hope that in the very near future we can hopefully see some possibly articles from yourself that will be out there for national consumption, because some of these ideas, clearly this is the direction we have to go in. I mean, it has become something like, really cliche to hear that term diversification. Economists, non-economists, I'm sure if I ask little children in primary school, they know that terminology, diversification. No, but because they are taught that on a real level, that look, some schools even carry the outdoor garden, and just to show that you must be looking outside of what they read in the textbooks about oil and gas and Trinidad being the inheritance of these things. So I want to thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I know time is almost upon us, but I would crave the indulgence of my panelists, that we can take a very short break, maybe 1 to 2 minutes, and then we will return. There is a particular article I would want to read to put just the final comments in some context, and then I ask gentlemen to give closing comments. I would love to have this program again, And this is a joke I wanted to make about the VAT refunds, because if, central businessmen get VAT refunds, we may be able to sponsor another program like this, and, right, Dr. David Lee, we can have people sponsoring these programs that we can speak on. So I don't know how that will work out yet, but but ladies and gentlemen, we take a very short break and then we come back to closing comments. So stay tuned with us.
Out and Mukdar to strike out.
Tune in every Friday afternoon at 4 p.m. drive time. The Mahasabha will strike back. Sitaram.
Coming May 13. For over 3 decades, it has been the season's #1 production. With the best performances. And this year, the annual Mother's Day Spectacular features a star-studded cast. In his first concert performance in the Caribbean, singer, songwriter, and rising UK star
To all my beautiful Tring friends, this is Junaid Malik. Come join me, Nishad, Inda, and the whole crew. This show will be spectacular.
And returning to the cast in a mini concert with your all-time favourite hits. The Melody King in Kanhai. Also performing Renuka Bhabian, Nari Raghuveer, Prakash Ramcharan, and Neera Hariprasad.
This is Mishrat M.
I'm in Kanhai. This is Junaid Malik.
The annual Mother's Day Spectacular 2023. Saturday the 13th of May at the Centre Point Mall Auditorium. Call 638-1171.
Join me, Harold Nabri, every Saturday afternoon from 4 for the program Suhana Safar right here on your favorite station, TV Jagriti. Suhana Safar, a program that goes behind the scenes, relives the pleasant memories and enjoy the modern music. I will explore the various aspects of the Indian film industry and celebrate with the players of this vast industry. You will hear some ghazals, bhajans, semi-classical music, and we'll also look at the history and development of the Indian music world. That's Suhana Safar every Saturday from 4 p.m. right here on your favorite station, TV Jagriti.
आपका धर्म, आपका स्टेशन, TV Jagriti.
Sitaram again, and good evening to viewers and listeners. Again, let me express my gratitude to all of you viewers and listeners for joining us on this program. And again, let me just say, Dr. David Lee, Member of Parliament for Pointe-à-Pierre, Chief Whip of the Opposition, MP Rushton Parray, Dr. Bushan Singh, economist, and I have Richard Ramkisson, of course, financial accountant. Ladies and gentlemen, we have had, I know we did start a little bit after 7, so we will try to wrap things up now. Possibly we will aim to close at about maybe between 10 past 9 and quarter past 9. We have about 20 minutes again. And we are really doing this because we would want to spend a few moments trying to, hopefully close off some of our points and give you what our final impressions are. But before doing so, before I call on my esteemed panelists to embark on that final, contribution, today's Guardian, I think, this is Express, today's Express on the inside page, you have TNT not in a bad shape, right? So as Minister Imbert is asking for supplementation of some 3.8 billion, he's saying TNT is not in a bad shape. Of course, you have heard very analytical point of views here. This is not a political platform, albeit 3 of us are politicians. We have given the data to back whatever we have surmised here on the program this evening. So you will know that we hold a cautious or healthy skepticism when it comes to what Minister Imbert has said. in respect of the mid-year review. I want to turn now to what I think is a more realistic outlook in the country. And Dr. David Lee and MP Rushton Parray are senior men, so maybe they have some flexibility, but I have to take my full cue, right? I take full instructions and marching orders from the leader of the opposition, Mrs. Kamla Persad-Bissessar, and I would want to say, I say that on a lighter note, but I want to say that I think Mrs. Persad-Bissessar did a phenomenal job in terms of being the first responder in the parliament yesterday to the budget, mid-year review budget presentation by Minister Imbert. And no matter what self-dubbed financial wizard he put himself across us, Ms. Persad-Bissessar summed it up very nicely, and it is on page 3 of today's Express. People are suffering and gripped by fear. And this was really the theme of her presentation, that, you know, when you're dealing with budget, you have to break down what you are doing, whatever fiscal policy, in this case supplementation of your overall fiscal policy, it must be something that the citizenry can benefit from. And that is something that she made the point that we did not see, people are not experiencing in the country. And so her words, what she pointed to, and I'm reading from the article, the reality is that the people of Trinidad and Tobago are suffering even as millions of dollars are being pocketed by select attorneys, says Mrs. Persad-Bissessar. In her parliamentary contribution to the mid-year budget review debate, Ms. Persad-Bissessar recalled that Imbert had presented 8 budgets, and in the latest mid-year budget review, the minister sought to distract from the real state of the economy, and that is something we concur with wholly. The point remains, and this is a quote from her speech, from her contribution, the point remains, it is still bad. The economy is bad, and people are suffering in this country. And this exercise today, meaning the mid-year review, where the government is asking for some $4 billion more, the Minister of Finance has not told us how this will improve the quality of life of the people. This is the crisp, and it is pregnated with a lot of meaning. These are the words of Mrs. Persad-Bissessar. She said that citizens are fearful, gripped by fear and the expectation about how the additional $4 billion would deal with the major issue of crime, something that we are not satisfied with. So I can't go through the entire article, but I urge people to read the different newspapers. I have chosen the Express because I think the headline summed it up. People are suffering and gripped by fear, says Mrs. Persad-Bissessar. So I use that. Gentlemen are free to take the cue from this. I thought it was something that we may not have gone too deep into, but it is something that, as Member of Parliament for Chaguanas West hosting this forum, certainly this is something that a lot of the constituents of Chaguanas West and the country, I know the mood in the country is, look, how are you making lives better? How are you enhancing the quality of life that people will not be tempted to turn to that life of crime? What are you doing to put in place so that we can see immediate impact on the criminal elements? And those are things that we are not really seeing. We have not seen anything tangible, and the policies are particularly flawed in this regard. So I want to give full kudos to Mrs. Persad-Bissessar for her response yesterday, and of course in terms of what she was able to marshal on behalf of the citizenry of Trinidad and Tobago. So I will take the same line that we took before, and maybe I can start with Dr. David Lee in terms of summing up his closing comments.
Thank you, Dinesh. And I think your remarks just now and the remarks of the political leader, opposition leader in today's papers sums it up well. I think it really tells or paints a picture of what is happening in our country today. Minister Imbert is bringing us, at the end of the day, a $62 billion budget. And if anyone out there can tell me they are feeling a $62 billion budget in our country, please tell me where to go and find the $62 billion. I remember when the PP government was in power between 2010 and 2015, and they bought budgets of $60 million and $61 billion and $62 billion. The country felt it. You felt it. We as businessmen felt that kind of economy that was going on. And I think it has to do with with crime. If this government does not solve crime or get a grip and handle on crime fast, we are just spinning top in mud. You feel it out there. I mean, when you look at certain entertainment areas in Trinidad, by 6 o'clock it's closed up. It's a ghost town. Businesses are feeling it. Businesses are grinding to a halt. And Mrs. Basad is correct. Imbert came for $4 billion more yesterday and never showed us or told us the quality of life. Where is this money going? And this money is really just to pay arrears. It's money already spent, work that has already been done, and he's just paying off bills. So it's not stimulating the country. That $4 billion that he took from us yesterday is not stimulating the country. It's just to pay off old bills. So, as holistically, I agree with Mrs. Basad Bissessa. The country is gripped in fear. Our quality of life is eroding at a tremendous pace. The middle class sector in our country is no longer there, in my view. We have a country that is really close to Venezuela, a haves and a haves not, right? And we do not want to get there. Honestly, the bigger you have, the fatter you have a middle class, the more stability you have as a country. That's worldwide. So in closing, Dinesh, I want to thank you. It was a pleasure being here. I think I am better off. I'm listening. And before I end, we spoke about that economist, that senior economist. We all know the name, right? And in his interview in the papers, what was telling for me was that this individual, I think he went to Oxford, right? He's well respected, well known. I think he's a true patriot of this country. He has given so much to the learning institution of UWI. And his statement yesterday, which I read in Parliament, that individual, that senior individual, when he looked at the IMF report and analyzed the IMF report, he was considering migrating. He is saying, what am I doing in this country? He is saying, based on this report, and he's an economist, he sees no hope. I mean, if he can dissect those numbers and say that tells a lot of where we are as a country. So Dinesh, I want to thank you very much. I hope you invite me again when you get your sponsors. And it has been a pleasure. And I am saying that, again, as I close, our gas prices at the gas stations, we are overpaying the prices, and I'm asking the government to reduce the prices at the pump for the citizenry of Trinidad and Tobago, because we are overpaying the price at the pump in our gas station. So I thank you very much, Dinesh, and I will say more when I join you tomorrow.
Thank you, Chief Whip Dr. David Lee, MP for Pointe-a-Pierre. Let me move over to my colleague, MP Rushton Parray. Rushton, any closing thoughts? And as I said, I know we are on the clock, but I don't want you to be too hasty. There are a lot of issues which you dealt with yesterday and on this program this evening, and I would hope that you could take some time and let our audience know what is it they should be looking out for moving forward.
So again, thank you, Dinesh, and I want to address the two articles that you just showed on that second page of the Express, when Minister Embers say things is not all that bad in this country, But you see, sometimes you feel that you're living off credit. And when you look that we are saddling the next two generations with $150 billion in debt, I suspect by the end of this fiscal year, based on the collapse in energy prices, we may even push that that deficit to about $8 or $10 billion. And when you add the VAT that is outstanding, there's another $6-7 billion, because that's recurring. Even if he pays 3, by the time he pays 3 and 2, it's going to go back up to 5 and 6 and 7. And I asked the minister yesterday that he must address that, because that money, comes out of circulation. And I know both Bushan and Richard understands the multiplier effect of money. And I mean, without getting into terms of bank reserves and so on, $7 billion is about, $25-24 billion in money power that you can use in your economy at the end of the day, right? So we have to be careful of that. Yesterday, Minister, and I mean, one of the advice that came off the Article 4 consultation was prudent fiscal management, to put a fiscal policy of control that will stretch across successive administrations. Jamaica is doing it. The Chancellor of the Exchequer in the United Kingdom has suggested that in order to manage these long-term public debts, we're going to put controls that any administration come, they have to follow certain guidelines, put some escape clause in the events of disasters and emergencies. We can come back to your parliament to deal with that. So, the minister can say what he wants, but we are seeing a different Trinidad and Tobago. His disguise, the way how he clouds things, I think he's only fooling. I mean, it's like the emperor's new clothes, right? The other thing I want to quickly speak about in terms of what Ms. Prasad Bisesa said, she's absolutely correct. I'm going to give you the example of Mayaro. We are having problems getting our beach houses filled. People are not coming to Mayaro. They are afraid to stay in the weekends. They're saying, you hear of burglaries, break-ins, and so on. You have an issue where, as the police is tightening in some urban areas, they're looking for soft targets. So you're coming to Rio Claro, coming to Mayaro. So we have to engage in a lot of expenditure in terms of business. In the United Kingdom, they look at, in terms of nighttime business, it generates £1 billion a night. In terms of nighttime business, I was surprised a couple of weeks ago. I came to Chaguanas, and at 5:30, I'm driving now at Montrose Main Road, and every business closed. And I'm saying 20 years ago, 8 o'clock in the night, businesses open in Chaguanas. And when you have that, you have the deflation of your economy. You have, look at what's happening with small business. We talk about small business wrapping up, closing early. But what's the importance of small business in rural communities? They are the businesses that support sports clubs, all force clubs, football clubs, in terms of how the community gels together. The 4 or 5 little grocery and supermarket and bars and so on, they support the activities in the community. When you have a collapse of those things, the community suffers. Outside of the unemployment issues, you have the community suffering as well. And the last comment that I want to make in terms of, we talk about, they say we come to Parliament and we only complain, but we don't offer solutions. I want to put this before the general public here. The price for a barrel of oil right now is about $78. A single tourist brings to this country about $2,000 per person. Just think about that for a second in terms of the capacity we could have by moving our tourism business in this country. What you call it in terms of quantification of cocoa, you call it a tote. And a tote of cocoa on the international market is about $3,300 US a tote. Our Trinitario cocoa earns $5,500 US a tote in terms of on the international market. And we need to be smart. And just how we invite the BPTTs and the Shells and so on, and give them a 5-year window to explore and to pull out this resource from the sea and from the land in terms of oil, why can't we ask that chocolatier, one of the global chocolaters, to come and take 100 acres of cocoa, and invest for 3 years and pull it back, and let's hire our university graduates, and we earn the same royalties and taxes from those companies and make billions of dollars. So we're talking about diversification, we're talking about being smart, we're talking about manage our debt portfolio going forward. I believe that all is not lost in Trinidad and Tobago. I believe it requires a bit of intelligence, a bit of thinking, and something that I would have closed in my debate yesterday if I had gotten a chance was that tell Trinidad and Tobago, do not worry. The darkest night has a dawn and the sun will rise. And with that, Dinesh, I want to thank you for the opportunity to come and join you today, and I look forward to any other opportunity to come and speak on your programs. So thanks again.
Thank you very much, MP Rushton Parray. Gentlemen, on my left, we have now dealt with the politicians. So I want to give way now to the technical people, you know. So, Bushan, any closing comments would you want us to take away and digest, you know?
Yeah. You know, I want to give some advice to the general public, and I think, you know, people must look for value, you know. Make your dollar count, whether you go to you know, the supermarket or wherever you spend your money. Make sure you look for value for money. Dinesh, there's one thing that I did not deal with, and that is debt, overall debt, and debt to GDP. And I purposely didn't deal with it. Perhaps at another program we'll deal with that. But in terms of, so that's on the country level. On the individual level, I would encourage people to manage their debt levels, you know, so that you put yourself in a better position. You have, you know, you have to prepare on an individual level for property taxes, for new utility rates. Well, cable and internet has already increased, perhaps increase in water rate. You know, all of these things, and you have to be financially wise in how you manage your personal finances. You know, so that'll be my personal comments and advice to the public as a whole.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bushan Singh. And Richard, I turn to you. Richard is, of course, a constituent of Chaguanas West as well. So, Richard, I give you the last say in terms of closing off.
Well, Dinesh, you know, right now, the burning issue on our mind are crime. You know, we have attended a lot of town hall meetings, and, you know, people keep speaking about their fear and what is happening with them. And, you know, in most economic cycles indicate that during more difficult economic times, criminal activity increases. And how do you solve that? You have to try to generate economic activity within your country so that your businesses will grow. And, you know, the article by the Honorable Opposition Leader was basically speaking about that. $62 billion, and where is the opportunity for your businesses to grow? And, you know, the government might be thinking differently and making, and their thought process might be different. But from the ground level and from a business point of view, I am not seeing those opportunities. And the population is not seeing it. People on the ground is not seeing it. And, you know, I indicated earlier what is happening with them. And I would like to see that people, you know, take their political hats off their heads and start to think about the country and what this population is going through at the moment. Those home invasions, those businesses. I mean, we visited a businessman whose business was, the bandits were actually inside his business. And thank God they didn't get to his family. But what I saw after the next day is that the individual had to actually take over $200,000 of his money that he could have used for education and other and maybe investment capital in his business, and put it towards security, building massive gates and walls and all that to protect his family. And, you know, we have to look at that. And, you know, people have to, the government, the policy makers have to start to think about the population and you know, try to create opportunities for the population, for businesses, for individuals, so that economic growth could, you know, be increased and employment could be increased. And maybe that might be one of the recipes for success for our country. And, you know, people might not even be thinking about, if they're seeing the opportunities and they're seeing the crime surge going down, they might not be thinking about leaving and departing and the social aspects. You know, so we have to be very careful. You know, so with that closing remarks, I hope that the power would be listen and you know, really implement policies, maybe provide the police with more tools. I mean, crime battle is simple. You have primary policies, which is done by the police. You have secondary policies, which is done by businesses, you know, encouraging youths in terms of sport, investing in sport and community activities, Diwali, Ramila, whatever it is that you have, invest, get these youngsters involved, and then you have the judiciary, which is the tertiary aspect of it, you know. So, you know, we'd like to see those things happen and make our country a better place to live and alleviate that fear, that jail mentality that we are living in right now.
Thank you, Richard, and of course I appreciate your sentiments. Make our country a better place. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time I will want to wrap up. Let me say that a lot of certain dynamics have to really take place to have a program like this, particularly when, whilst you may be tipped off about a date, our Chief Whip is here. He will tell you that it is only when it is announced to the public in the Parliament that you can take that date as gold. So it was only last week Friday when it was announced after the Standing Finance Committee that Wednesday we would be returning to have the debate, not Wednesday, sorry, when we were having the debate, yes, Wednesday, yesterday, on this supplemental appropriation bill. That is when we were able to start, you know, putting certain things in place. So we could not have had the program before, but, you know, again, with certain commitments, once I spoke to the Secretary General of the Mahasabha, who is also part of, you know, Radio and TV Jagrati, Mr. Vijay Maharaj, I know that he always accommodates us, and on this occasion it was no different. So I want to thank him first of all, because once we said we wanted to have the program, Secretary General Vijay Maharaj did not hesitate. He confirmed, and once this slot was open tonight, we were able to get it. So I want to thank Shri Vijay Maharaj. I want to thank Radio and TV Jagrati, because they have been dealing with the ads and running the ads, and of course it went on social media, but I need to thank them as well. The technical team who is here this evening, Josh and Bimal is here this evening with us in studio. I want to especially thank the panelists, all esteemed gentlemen having their own businesses, having their own careers, their own professions to pursue, and of course pursuing, in the case of Richard, his NGOs and his sports club. In the case of Bushan, assisting at different communities, in different communities and different community levels. And of course, well, as MPs, we have parliamentary work to do and other things with our constituents. So I want to thank all of you, because I know it was on short notice, knowing that we only got confirmation of the date last week Friday, that we were able to put things in place, and you all made yourself available. Rushton, in your case, I know Nalisha is here to support, so I want to thank her as well. Our political, and this applies to, of course, Dr. David Lee, MP Rushton Parray, and myself. I must say that to Mrs. Kamala Prasad Bisesa for her guidance and, of course, the encouragement as we, you know, get ourselves involved in a lot of these debates, get involved in the debates in the Parliament. I would like to say to our honorable leader that, you know, we are deeply appreciative of all the work she's doing. So I want to thank her. All of this would not be a success if it wasn't for you, viewers and listeners. So I want to thank the TV and Radio Jagrati viewers and listeners. It was always a pleasure for me and a privilege to be able to hold programs, and even if not host programs, to be on programs that will ultimately address you. And I know this evening's audience is wider than the Radio and TV Jagrati, because it is on the social media stream, which will go to our respective pages, go to our constituencies outside of the Jagrati network. So I want to thank all of you through all of these networks for joining us this evening. Of course, I have cooked and I've prepared dinner for my panelists and all those who are here, so we need to depart here so we can have that dinner. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Good evening. And to all of you viewers of Radio and TV Jagrati, Sitaram. Oh yes, we have one.